I'm JME, your narrator. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories. G9 never really sleeps, and Kane liked it that way. The sprawling metropolis was a neon-lit carnival of endless distractions, its skyline punctuated by jagged towers glowing in shades of violet, pink, and teal. Holographic ads flickered on every corner, hawking everything from synthesized drinks to alien beauty treatments that promised a glow to rival the stars. Kane strolled through the cabbie district, nursing the last sips of a Furio ale. The sweet, fizzy drink didn't do much to dull the ache of the empty credits chip in his pocket, but it was better than nothing. He'd spent the last few hours losing a decent chunk of his savings at a shady VR casino, betting on simulations rigged against humans. He should have known better, but Kane had always been a sucker for shiny things, and G9 had a lot of shiny things. Next time, stick to cards, he muttered to himself, tossing the empty bottle into a waste drone that beeped cheerfully as it swallowed the trash. As he debated whether to head home or find another way to waste the night, a low hum caught his attention. A hover cab slid to a stop just a few feet away, its sleek silver body gleaming under the district's neon glow. Kane frowned. The cab looked too nice for this part of town, where most rides were dented junkers barely held together by duct tape and bad decisions. The passenger door swung open, and a voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "Human, get in the cab. I need to show you something." Kane blinked. A chemo woman leaned out of the cab, her glowing green eyes locked on him with an intensity that made his pulse jump. Her skin shimmered with a faint blue luminescence, the natural bioluminescence of her kind, and her outfit, if it could even be called that, was a study in extravagance. She wore a transparent, iridescent jacket that glinted in the city lights, paired with a silver bikini that clung to her figure like liquid metal. Kane hesitated, glancing around as if someone might jump out and yell that this was some kind of prank. "I don't have time to explain," the woman snapped, her tone sharp but oddly enticing. "Get in, or they'll find us." That was enough to jolt Kane into action. He wasn't sure who they were, but he'd seen enough trouble in his life to know he didn't want to meet them. Ducking into the cab, he barely had time to close the door before it sped off, the city blurring into streaks of light outside the window. "Care to tell me what this is about?" Kane asked, settling into the plush seat. The cab's interior was surprisingly clean, with soft blue lighting and a faint scent of alien flowers. The woman exhaled, running a hand through her sleek dark hair. "Name's Sci-Fi, and you, lucky human, just became my escape plan." Kane raised an eyebrow. "Escape plan? From who?" Sci-Fi smirked, leaning back in her seat. Her green eyes glowed faintly, and Kane felt an odd flutter in his chest as her gaze lingered on him. Chemo women had that effect. Something about their auras could make you feel like the center of the universe, even if you knew they were playing you. "Let's just say I borrowed something I wasn't supposed to," she said, reaching into the pocket of her jacket. She pulled out a small spherical object about the size of a plum. Its surface shimmered with a faint oily sheen, and Kane felt a strange tingle in the air around it. "And that is a siphon sphere," Sci-Fi said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Human tech. Very illegal, very valuable. Emits pheromones that can influence the minds of just about any sentient species. The gangs on this planet would kill for it." Kane leaned back, whistling low. "You just happened to borrow it, huh? Let me guess. Someone's not thrilled about that." Sci-Fi's smirk widened. "Smart and handsome. I knew I picked the right human." Kane rolled his eyes, though he couldn't help but feel a small thrill at the compliment. "So what's the plan? You can't exactly waltz into a pawn shop with that thing." "That's where you come in." Sci-Fi leaned closer, her aura glowing faintly pink. The color Kane knew was a chemo's way of signaling amusement or attraction. "Help me get out of this mess, and I'll make it worth your while." Kane snorted. "And how exactly do you plan to make it worth my while?" Sci-Fi's smile turned sly. "I think you know. She tilted her head, her glowing eyes meeting his. One night. No strings attached. Just you, me, and whatever happens after we survive this. Kane blinked, momentarily caught off guard. He wasn't exactly a saint. He'd had his fair share of flings across the galaxy. But this was bold, even for him. Still, the adrenaline coursing through his veins and Saiva's undeniable charm made it hard to say no. "All right," he said, leaning back with a cocky grin. "You've got a deal." The cab wove through G9's chaotic streets, narrowly dodging other hover cars and the occasional rogue drone. Saiva barked orders at the cab's autopilot, directing it toward the Oba district. "What's in Oba?" Kane asked, watching the neon glow of the city fade into darker, grittier tones as they approached the district. "A buyer," Saiva said simply. "Someone who's willing to pay a fortune for this sphere. Once the deal's done, we're out of here." Kane frowned. "And you trust this buyer?" "Trust." Saiva laughed, a light melodic sound that somehow made Kane feel both charmed and slightly suspicious. "Of course not. But they hate the NECA even more than I do. So they're the best shot I've got." As if on cue, the cab's console lit up with a flashing red warning. Saiva cursed under her breath, glancing at the rear-view display. "Damn it. They found us." Kane turned to look and saw 3 sleek black hover cars speeding toward them, their headlights cutting through the night like knives. "Friends of yours?" he asked. "Not exactly." Saiva tapped furiously at the console, trying to override the cab's autopilot. "Hold on, human. This might get bumpy." The cab shot forward, the force slamming Kane back into his seat. Saiva gripped the controls, manually steering the cab as it veered through narrow alleys and under glowing billboards. Behind them, the black hover cars gained ground, their engines roaring like hungry predators. Kane's heart raced as he watched the chase unfold. "You sure you know what you're doing?" "Relax," Saiva said, flashing him a quick grin. "I've been in tighter spots than this." The cab skidded around a corner, narrowly avoiding a delivery drone that beeped angrily as it spun out of the way. Saiva's focus was razor-sharp, her hands moving with practiced precision as she guided the cab through the chaos. Kane couldn't help but admire her. Even in the middle of a high-speed chase, there was something undeniably magnetic about her confidence, her fearlessness. He'd met plenty of chemo women before, but Saiga was different. "Hang on," she shouted, pulling the cab into a steep dive. The vehicle plunged into the lower levels of G9, where the neon lights gave way to dimly lit streets and shadowy figures lurking in the alleys. The pursuing hover cars followed, their engines snarling like wild beasts. Kane gritted his teeth as the cab weaved between buildings, barely avoiding collisions at every turn. "Any bright ideas?" he asked, glancing at Saiva. "Just one," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "But it's risky." Before Kane could ask what she meant, Saiva yanked the cab into a sharp turn, heading straight for a massive holographic billboard advertising some kind of alien energy drink. "You're not seriously." "Hold on," Saiva shouted. The cab barreled through the billboard, its holographic image flickering and distorting as they passed through. On the other side, Saiva hit a button on the console, and the cab's exterior shimmered, its color shifting to a dull gray. The pursuing hover cars roared past, their drivers failing to notice the now camouflaged cab blending into the shadows below. Saiva let out a breath, leaning back in her seat. "That should buy us some time." Kane exhaled, his heart still pounding. "You're insane, you know that." She smirked, her aura glowing faintly pink again. "You love it." Kane couldn't argue with that. As Saiva steered the cab into a shadowy alcove beneath one of G9's sprawling undercity causeways, Kane tried to steady his breathing. The chaotic dive into the lower levels had shaken him more than he wanted to admit, but he wasn't about to let Saiva see it. She cut the engine, and the cab settled with a soft hiss. The only sounds were the distant hum of hover traffic above and the occasional drip of condensation from the massive pipes overhead. Now what? Kane asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Sci-Fi turned to him, her glowing green eyes dancing with mischief. Now we walk. Kane blinked. Walk? We just outran half the underworld, and now you want to stroll through G9's most charming murder alleys. She grinned. You're quick, human. I like that. But the cab's too easy to track now. If we want to make it to the buyer without a gang of Nika goons showing up, we need to go low-tech. Kane sighed but followed her out of the cab. The air in the lower levels was thick and humid, carrying a faint metallic tang that stuck to the back of his throat. They navigated narrow pathways illuminated by flickering neon signs advertising questionable services in languages Kane couldn't read. Tell me something, Kane said as they walked. Why me? Out of all the humans in this city, why drag me into your little heist? Sci-Fi glanced over her shoulder, her aura flickering faintly pink. Why not you? You've got that perfect mix of boredom and bad decisions written all over you. Besides, she trailed off, her eyes scanning the shadows ahead. Besides what? She stopped abruptly, her expression turning serious. Quiet. We're not alone. Kane froze, his ears straining to catch whatever had spooked her. For a moment, all he heard was the distant clatter of pipes and the occasional hiss of a steam vent. Then from somewhere ahead came the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and too heavy to be friendly. Sci-Fi's hand darted inside her iridescent jacket, and when it reemerged, she was holding a sleek, needle-like weapon that pulsed with faint blue light. Stay close to me, she murmured, her voice low but steady. Kane glanced around, his unease growing. I don't suppose you've got a spare. She smirked, the pink glow of her aura flaring briefly. You've got fists, haven't you? Fantastic, Kane muttered. Human meat shield reporting for duty. Before Sci-Fi could retort, a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead. It was tall and broad, with skin the color of tarnished brass and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. Nika. Kane had encountered their kind before, brutish, violent, and relentlessly territorial. Sci-Fi. The Nika growled, its voice like grinding metal. You've been busy. I could say the same for you, Torim. Sci-Fi replied, her tone casual but her grip on the weapon tightening. Didn't think the Nika bothered with the lower districts. Torim let out a low, guttural laugh. When you steal from us, we make exceptions. Kane glanced at Sci-Fi. This one of the people you borrowed from. Borrowed is such a strong word, she said, not taking her eyes off Torim. Let's call it a creative trade. Torim took a step closer, and Kane noticed two more Nika emerged from the shadows behind him, their heavy boots crunching against the ground. This was bad. 3 of them, and only one weapon between him and Sci-Fi. I don't suppose we can talk this out, Kane offered, though he doubted diplomacy was on the menu. Torim bared his jagged teeth in what might have been a grin. Hand over the sphere, and I'll make your deaths quick. Tempting, Sci-Fi said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. But I think I'll pass. With that, she raised her weapon and fired. The needle-like device emitted a burst of blue energy that struck Torim square in the chest, sending him stumbling backward with a roar of pain. Run, Sci-Fi shouted, grabbing Kane's arm and pulling him down a side alley. The Nika gave chase, their heavy footsteps echoing off the narrow walls. Kane's heart pounded as he sprinted after Sci-Fi, the damp air stinging his lungs. You sure you know where you're going? He called out. Would you stop asking that? She shot back, her tone somewhere between exasperation and amusement. They rounded a corner and emerged onto a wider street, lined with dilapidated stalls, selling everything from glowing alien fruit to counterfeit tech. The vendors barely glanced up as Sci-Fi and Kane raced past, but the sound of the Nika's pursuit drew a few wary looks. Sci-Fi skidded to a stop near a rusted metal staircase leading up to an old maintenance platform. Up there, she said, gesturing for Kane to climb. He didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up the stairs, Sci-Fi close behind. From the platform, They had a bird's eye view of the street below. The NECA arrived seconds later, their glowing yellow eyes scanning the crowd. "Stay down," Sci-Fi whispered, crouching behind a stack of old crates. Kane followed her lead, peering through a gap between the crates as the NECA began questioning one of the vendors. The alien they were interrogating, a wiry creature with 4 arms and a face like a wrinkled walnut, shrugged repeatedly, apparently unwilling or unable to give them any information. "Looks like we bought ourselves a few minutes," Kane said quietly. Sci-Fi nodded, her breathing steady despite the chase. "The buyer's close. We just need to make it to the old docking bay at the edge of the district." "And you're sure this buyer won't just shoot us and take the sphere?" Kane asked. Sci-Fi grinned. "Oh, they'll try. But that's what makes it fun." Kane shook his head. "You've got a twisted idea of fun." They waited until the NECA moved on before slipping down from the platform and continuing toward the docking bay. The streets grew quieter as they left the market behind, the flickering lights and distant hum of the city giving way to the eerie silence of the abandoned industrial zone. The docking bay was a massive, dome-like structure that had once been a hub of activity. Now it was little more than a rusted skeleton, its walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. Sci-Fi led Kane through a side entrance, her weapon drawn. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavernous space. The buyer was waiting for them near the center of the bay. She was a tall, elegant alien with pale blue skin and a flowing black cloak that shimmered like oil. Her eyes glowed softly, and her expression was one of calm amusement. "Sci-Fi," the buyer said, her voice smooth and melodious. "You've outdone yourself this time." Sci-Fi held up the sphere. "As promised, the real deal." The buyer stepped forward, her gaze flicking briefly to Kane. "And who's this?" "Just my human sidekick," Sci-Fi said with a shrug. "He's harmless." Kane raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The buyer examined the sphere, her expression unreadable. "Beautiful and dangerous, which is why it's worth every credit," Sci-Fi said, her tone confident. The buyer smiled faintly. "Indeed, the agreed-upon amount has already been transferred to your account." Sci-Fi's wrist console chimed, confirming the transaction. She slipped the sphere into the buyer's outstretched hand, then stepped back. "Pleasure doing business," Sci-Fi said. The buyer inclined her head. "I trust you'll find your way out without incident." Sci-Fi didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed Kane's arm, and they made their way back toward the entrance. As soon as they were outside, Kane let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's it. No double-cross. No dramatic betrayal." Sci-Fi smirked. "Disappointed. Relieved, actually," he admitted. Back at her temporary hideout, a modest, dimly lit loft overlooking one of G9's quieter districts, Sci-Fi finally relaxed. She shrugged off her iridescent jacket, tossing it onto a chair, and poured herself a drink from a small, glowing decanter. Kane leaned against the wall, watching her with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "So what happens now?" Kane asked. Sci-Fi turned to him, her glowing green eyes locking onto his. "Now," she said, her voice low and teasing, "I make good on my promise." She crossed the room in a few graceful steps, slowly undressing herself before him, her aura glowing a soft pink as she closed the distance between them. Kane felt his pulse quicken as she placed a hand on his chest, her touch sending a warm, electric thrill through him. "I meant what I said, Kane," she murmured, her gaze never wavering. "You helped me when you didn't have to. And I always keep my promises." Kane smirked, his confidence returning as he wrapped an arm around her waist. "Well, far be it from me to refuse a lady." Sci-Fi's laugh was soft and melodic, and as she leaned in to kiss him, the glow of her aura enveloped them both, casting the room in a warm pink light. Outside, the city hummed with life, oblivious to the pair who had just outsmarted one of its deadliest gangs. For now, at least, Kane didn't care about anything but the present, about Sci-Fi and the moment they were sharing. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he'd finally made a decision he wouldn't regret.